Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you all are having a wonderful morning. I'm on a little bit later than I want to be. This morning I had a doctor's appointment that went longer than anticipated, but I also had a whole entire moment putting all of this together. Today, I am going to be talking about special needs homeschooling and using the IEW writing curriculum. But again, I had a whole entire moment just because I am a certified IEW instructor. But let me introduce myself to those who don't know me. I'm Alicia Brown. I am a certified IEW instructor. I formerly homeschooled. I homeschooled for 10 years, and I'm also the owner of homeschoolclick.com. I work with for elementary through high school students. I teach writing and grammar classes that lay a foundation for a lifetime of excellent writing. And primarily, I use IEW to do that. But I wanted to add that today I'm not really coming to you as a certified IEW instructor. I'm mostly coming to you as a parent. When I was putting this program together, it really took me back because I have, just to kind of give you some information about me, I have four children of my own. They're all teenagers now. They're 13, 15, 16, and 17. I have to think about that sometimes. Like what ages are they? Um, but I have two students who are struggling or were struggling learners, continue to struggle with different things. And then I have two students who are considered, in the traditional sense, gifted. And as I was thinking this morning, actually, I was like literally crying because I was remembering when I first began to experience in homeschooling. You know, you have that paper that the doctor gives you, or that they say, okay, by the first grade or the second grade, your child should be doing X, Y, and Z, and you're like still in A, B, and C, or your child isn't showing that type of progression. I remember when I realized, oh my gosh, now my child is starting to identify that something is different, or that they aren't answering a question as quickly as everybody else, or they are working a lot harder than their siblings or some of their peers. I remember going through and trying to figure out, like, what is an IEP and a 504, and what do I do with all of that, and how do I help my child with all of the things that they are navigating through. On the flip side, I had a child too that they just acquired information super fast. Like, it was really easy for them academically to acquire information. And so, you know, with each of those scenarios, I would ask myself that question, like, can I give them what they need? So this was something that I really hadn't thought a lot about when it came to studying homeschooling. I researched curriculum. I researched, okay, the types of homeschooling methodologies, things of that nature. But until it was in my lap, I hadn't really thought about, oh, what if I have a struggling learner, until I actually had struggling learners? Or what if I have a gifted learner, until I had gifted learners? And so that really took me into like just worry. Like, do I know what to do here? I doubted that I had the abilities to serve my own kids and to meet their needs. I was fearful. But I want to just share this one resource with you that really, for me, kind of helped me to reframe how I thought about my struggling learners and just my approach. And so I just want to show you this book. This quote here. It says, "Too many children ask, 'Am I smart?' And how smart am I? The better question is, how am I smart?" And there is this amazing book. I met this young lady, Dr. Kathy Coe, I think is how you pronounce her last name, at a homeschool convention. And "How Am I Smart" A Parent's Guide to Multiple Intelligences. That quote came from this particular book. This book is amazing. If you have not read it, I absolutely highly recommend you going out and getting this particular book. But I appreciate, she goes on and she talks about that there are all kinds of intelligences. There's word smart, there's logic smart, there's picture smart, there's music smart, there's body smart, nature smart, people smart, self smart. So um, there are all kinds of ways that our students are what I call exceptional learners. I know I heard that term somewhere and I can't remember where. There are all kinds of ways that our students are smart. Um, and I just think that I love how she frames this, because when I began to look at my students at the beginning, it was just like, oh my gosh, are my kids smart? Are they going to be smart enough to do X, Y, and Z? And I love that she changed the question. How am I smart? And I began to give them that question to ask of themselves. And she goes on to say in this book, you are privileged to help children identify which ones are their strengths, which one of those smarts are their strengths, because they have more than one. They have multiple intelligences. Inspiring children to believe they are smart in many ways is exhilarating. Doubts lift, excuses fade away. Now they know, and us too, um, they can be successful in school. So today what I want to do is talk about the IEW Resources for Special Education. They have a lot of support. I know writing and grammar, those are just big areas I know in kind of homeschooling, or at least for me, that um, we worry about our children doing well. And so I want to share just a few resources that IEW has for general special education, just no matter what your situation might be or what situation your learner might be in, just some resources that you definitely want to check out. I'll talk about special education resources for dysgraphia, special education resources for dyslexia, and special education resources for ADHD. There are, again, a lot more resources on the IEW site than I'll be able to share with you here today, but I just want to start pointing you in the direction of the resources that are available to you if you're considering IEW, or just in general, like writing in general, grammar, reading, spelling in general. These are materials that you may find helpful and useful. So let's talk about the very first one. The first one, there are two webinars that I highly, highly recommend everyone start with, no matter what the situation might be with your struggling learner or your gifted learner. There is a webinar called Struggling Learners Special Education Strategies for Teachers and Parents. And then there's a second webinar called Struggling Learners Special Education Answers to Difficult Questions. Now, I have to say that I actually recently listened to the first one, and you have to go, like, as soon as you're done watching this, definitely go over to, it's in the show notes, the link to the special education area on the IEW page. But that one, there's a conversation with Linda. I forgot her last name. I think it's Mikot, Mykot, I believe. But she shares just her story of struggling as a writer all throughout college and her adult life, and her story of homeschooling, and also her story of homeschooling her own kids and tutoring other students with IEW, and just how we can provide that support for our struggling learners. And she gives us strategies. One of the things that I found, super helpful that they were sharing, and I'll share this with you all. I found it really helpful that they talked about in that particular webinar how to separate the complexities that exist in writing. So again, a lot of times when we are wanting our students or our own children to write, we sometimes fail to acknowledge that there are lots of skills happening at the same time. They're there's reading involved, there's thinking involved, there's of course the writing, the physical writing, there's spelling involved. So there are so many things that are involved when it comes to writing that we want to really make sure that we can separate those complexities. And in that particular webinar, they talk about how you can separate those complexities, how you can use IEW to really just kind of focus on what the students' strengths are, capitalize on those strengths, and then use assistive, I can't talk today, assistive technology resources, and other resources that might be available for areas where they struggle, just so that we remove the barrier to them writing. She also, posed the question, like, what is writing? What does that mean? Does it mean like physically writing? Does it mean thinking of the content? So definitely watch that webinar on the IEW website. It is super helpful if you have, or if you're tutoring or you're working with a struggling student. You must watch that webinar. They will give you lots of wonderful resources to support your struggling learner or your gifted learner. The second thing I want to share with you is, if you have a student who is diagnosed with dysgraphia, this is not an area where I have a personal student, but I do have lots of other students that I work with who do have dysgraphia, and I wanted to point those with this particular diagnosis, I want to point them to this resource, or these resources that IEW provides. So there is a podcast episode, is episode 65. So write that one down if this is something that would be helpful or beneficial to you. And it's called Special Education Struggles and Suggestions if your student is struggling specifically with dysgraphia. There's also a blog post that's called So What Exactly is Dysgraphia? And then the last resource would be Help for Dysgraphia, Hands-Off Content, Hands-On Style. So this resource really helps you to understand, if you're considering writing in general. Oh, I'm sure we're all considering writing in general, but how can you support your student who may struggle with dysgraphia with the skill of writing? Whether or not you use IEW, these resources will be really, really helpful. The next resource that I want to tell you about is for dyslexic students. So if anyone has children or students who have dyslexia, there are some excellent resources that IEW provides for you. So episode 59 is titled IEW and Dyslexia. It's a conversation with Susan Barton. Episode 64 is Special Education Struggles and Suggestions. And this one, again, specifically focuses on a diagnosis of dyslexia. And then episode 231, these are all podcasts, so you can hear the conversation. The Dyslexic Advantage with Brock and Fernette Eid, I believe is how you say their last name. Those are specifically for parents who have students who struggle with dyslexia. And then they have two articles I would highly recommend. It's called one is called Dyslexia: Finding Help and Hope for Your Struggling Reader, and then Don't Let Dyslexia Get You Down. So I don't know about you, but I just appreciate that there is this emphasis for those of us who have students who struggle or students who are gifted, to give us that extra beyond just, okay, this is a curriculum and this is how the curriculum works, but how then can we maximize the use of this particular curriculum and support our students in whichever way they need support. Now, the next resource I want to point you to is, if you have students who struggle with ADHD, that's something that, I had to work with in my own home, and I really appreciate IEW for how the curriculum is structured to help students with ADHD. Episode 66, which is a podcast episode, is called Special Education Struggles and Suggestions, and that's specifically for ADHD. And then Beyond Surviving, a Story of Thriving with ADHD. This is a blog post that IEW has. And again, just a reminder, the link to all of these resources it's going to be in the show notes. So you don't have to worry about writing everything down. But if you have a specific need and you want to make sure that you go right to the need that IEW meets for that particular struggling student, I just wanted to point out these are two great resources to begin with. So anyhow, I would just say here are some ways that I have found IEW's resources helpful for me as a parent. So I'm talking to you as a parent. So I have a student that struggle with my own personal children, struggle with expressive language delay. And then, of course, executive functioning is definitely something that is a struggle in my own home. So I know that whether you're familiar with IEW or not, one of the things that IEW provides in terms of the way the program is laid out is every single student writes a keyword outline before they write. And that keyword outline serves as the plan or the blueprint for their paper. And for my child who was diagnosed very early on, like probably around 6 or 7, if I can remember, 6, 7, maybe 8 at the latest, with expressive language delay. We went through, of course, all the therapy and things of that nature. But what was super helpful with IEW is that keyword outline, allowing her to write down those 3 keywords, symbols, numbers, and abbreviations, and then her being able to slow her brain down to take those 3 keywords and turn them back into a complete sentence. That skill by itself was a game changer for us in our house. It was so, so helpful. The repetition that IEW offers to students as well. These are just good for IEW was great for all of my students in terms of the structure and the style, the way that the curriculum is laid out. But the repetition that is provided, so that keyword outlining process happens for every single unit, no matter whether they're writing nonfiction or fiction writing. So they get that retelling process, they get that practice. I was in classical conversation, so I started using the keyword outlining process whenever my student had to give a presentation. And so I'm like, let's write a keyword outline so that you can give your presentation and you can, again, slow your brain down, think about what you want to say, read it, think, look up, speak. It worked so well, even in those situations when we weren't writing a paper. So personally, that worked really well for my struggling student with expressive language delay in my house. For executive functioning skills, which is something that was also a struggle here in my own home, I love the way IEW lays out their curriculum, where it's the checklist. The checklist is amazing, but with executive functioning, in addition to that, the way they break down what you should do for each day, because that is a struggle for some students. How do I take a whole assignment and break it down into smaller chunks? So a lot of the therapy recommendations that you'll get or that we received, it's kind of built into the program, the way IEW sets that program up. So I appreciated just having that support of the structure and stylistic techniques and the repetition. So be sure, if you have any comments, post your comments below. I'm really curious, what are some things that you have found that have been useful for your struggling learner or your struggling student or your gifted learner or your gifted student? I'd love to hear your resources, any of your questions. So make sure, even if you're watching or you plan to watch this or you're watching it on the replay, definitely have a conversation down at the bottom, because again, each of us has different situations that happen inside of our homeschooling families, and we can all be support to each other. But the main thing I wanted to say is you can do this. You can do this. I was literally thinking about, again, 9 years ago, when I was first navigating the IEP and the 504 waters, and I had no idea, how to deal with that and what all that would include and what that would require of me. And I was completely overwhelmed. And I was thinking today about my students now, and my students now are in traditional public school. So I was talking to a parent earlier this week, and they were asking like, you know, will this translate, and how, how will they do if we ever have to put them in public school? And I can say for all four of my students, and they're all four different learners, they all did a great job. They all transitioned really well into public school, into the public school environment, and homeschooling provided us a great opportunity to really just focus on them, right? To take our time to say, what is it that you need? And let's go ahead and find those resources. I can focus 100% on you. So you can do this. I just wanted to just say that if you are at the beginning of your journey, absolutely you can do this. If you are not at the beginning of a journey, please post some resources that will help the rest of us. Because again, it's not that my students don't struggle still, but we have learned to support them in terms of, what their needs are with those particular struggles. And most of all, as I shared earlier, again, helping them to ask themselves the right question. Not am I smart, but how am I smart? That question is a game changer. So here's what I want you to do. And it's kind of, it goes along with the webinar that I asked for you to, that I thought would be really good for everyone to watch, no matter where you are. Struggling learners, special education, strategies for teachers and parents. So get out a piece of paper, and I want you to do this because this is something that they talked about in the webinar. So I want you to write down, what are your children's strengths? Like, what are the strengths of your learners? And if you have 4 kids, get 4 pieces of paper, and I want you to write down, what are their strengths? What are they? I remember, I'll just use my child who has expressive language delay, because when you're going through that, or when I was going through the whole IEP 504 process, it was so difficult to not focus only on my child's struggle. I also wanted to make sure I didn't forget I didn't want to keep seeing her through the lens of her IEP or her 504, her struggles. So write down, what are the strengths of your children? What are their strengths? And how can you capitalize on these strengths? How can you capitalize on these strengths? So my child was she was real kind of like a hands-on kinesthetic learner. She was a nurturer. She was a feeler. She is still a feeler. She definitely had music smart. So we talked about how am I smart? She was definitely music smart. She is body smart. She's absolutely picture smart. She's very self smart. So take a moment, write down your child's name at the top of the page, and write down, what is their strength? What are their strengths? They have multiple strengths. And maybe what are their intelligences? So again, word smart, logic smart, picture smart, music smart, body smart, nature smart, people smart, self smart. And then how can you capitalize on these? So how can maybe you take what their strengths are and capitalize on that? Add to your homeschooling day things that bring up those strengths and kind of play to those strengths. And then the next thing you want to ask yourself is like, what are their struggles? What are their struggles? So that's the second half of your page. What are their struggles? And then what assistive technology or resources can you give them to support their struggles? And there's a website, I didn't write it on here, but they mentioned it. It was called Reading Rocket's website. They mentioned it in that podcast or in the webinar that I mentioned. And I'm going to put it here on the screen here. It's called Reading Rocket's website. So if you're not actually sure, you can obviously, if you have a struggling learner, you can ask, anyone who might be working with your student. It's called Reading Rocket's website, but it's mentioned in the webinar. And that might be a great website to check out to find out. All right. And it's broken down, from what I understand, what they said in the webinar. It's broken down by the special education need. So you can just find your student's need, and then you can write down this resource that you might want to check out if you're not familiar with it already. So again, I just wanted to encourage you that you are enough for your child. You will do an excellent job. And because I am 9 years from that first diagnosis, I can tell you as a parent of two children who struggle and two who are noted as gifted, that they all are doing fantastic and they will do well, and so will your students. So anyway, I'm so glad that you're here and that you had a chance to join me. Don't forget that if you want to be notified when I go live or post, make sure you like or subscribe. But most important, if you have a struggling learner, or if you have any experience with this topic, I'm coming to you as a parent, not a professional today, but make sure you post resources that have helped your student, your family, so that we can learn from you as well. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next live Tuesdays, generally at 10 a.m. I was a little late today because I had a doctor's appointment, but come back next week, Tuesday, 10 a.m. I'll see you. Take good care.